And we are live. So, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on at what point you are in your day. Welcome to our 17th, I think, ENSO seminar.
Very good.
This will be the October 2017 ENSO seminar edition, which will be given by Rob Clowes. Rob is based in the University of Lisbon and is coordinator of the Wide Minds group there, who are sort of a group of interdisciplinary researchers looking at a whole manner of things, Rob, actually. That's sort of a large part of the way in which minds interact with their environments, and in particular with different forms of technology, from written language to, as we were talking about today, the cloud. Or as XKCD repeatedly sort of reminds us, other people's computers. That's really just, you know, the cloud is just a short term for someone else's machine.
Right.
So, yeah. So we're going to give people, we have a couple of viewers in, we're going to give sort of a few people a little bit more time to log on and to sort of bring themselves up to speed. And so as, if you're interested in joining the session live, so that we'll be able to have a live conversation with Rob in the Q&A after the talk, you can send me an email to marek.mcgann@gmail.com. And I'll be able to send you the invitation link so you can join us. Other means of joining in the discussion are through the chat function on the YouTube live page. So if you're watching this through the event page, there is a chat section there, and I'll be able to relay your question to Rob during the Q&A session as well. And following on from the seminar is never finished. These are the seminars that just keep giving. Rob, you'll be delighted to know. There's a sort of a discussion forum available on the on Rob's page on the ENSO seminars website as well. So there's the possibility for some to continue there once the seminar is complete, once we're offline. Okay, so I will, we'll sort of just have a couple of more minutes before I'll ask Rob to kick off. But in the meantime, you can we have the opportunity. We're sort of delighted, in fact, that this month is a one-stop book tour for Rob, who has just recently published. I
don't know if you can see this actually, but
we can hold it slightly closer to the camera. Get your face out of the way so we can.
Okay, there we go. So,
full plug. Minds Online.
There's a book plug.
Web science, cognitive science, and the philosophy of mind. Okay.
Yes, and as Marek was pointing out, this is perhaps the smallest book tour in the world, or a book tour around my office. But it's good timing because hopefully this book sort of covers a whole bunch of stuff to do with the cognitive implications of the internet from a whole bunch of angles. So it's a kind of a review monograph written with Paul Smart and Richard Hirsmig, and it's actually mainly, I think the text is also available online. So if you're interested, it's definitely something you can have a look at.
Always keen for resources, and it's nice to know that you've properly have the book on the internet about the internet. The full log. Okay, so I think we can probably, we've sort of built up a few viewers here, and we can other people will be able to join in as they sort of come on stream and catch up. So I will just have one more quick check for see whether anyone's going to join us live. And then, okay, so Rob, it just remains for me to invite you to begin your talk on material agency and cloud technology.
Thanks so much, Marek, and thanks for inviting me. I'll just see if I can, hold on a sec, I'll just see if I can get this up, because I know it's, so just take a second, hopefully. And I'll share this, and hopefully,
Sounds examining. Okay.
Working. Do you now see?
Yeah. Okay. The slides are up. We had a little bit of a pause there, but the slides are now available.
Okay. If it runs into trouble, just let me know. Yeah, so this talk, material agency and cloud technology. I will dive straight in with a problematic. Well, no, first of all, we have here's a little plan. So I'm going to say a few words about the problem of internet technology and agency, and just briefly introduce that. Then I'm going to go on to look at, if you like, a very analytic kind of idea about what agency is, to give us some kind of background. I'm going to compare it with some work on what Lambros Malafouris calls material agency, and I'm going to do some kind of compare and contrast there. And I'm going to do a little critique of Bratman from the Malafouris sort of viewpoint, and then finally, although this will be quite brief, I imagine, I will bring things around to looking at the cloud, or bring things back to looking at the cloud and the internet. And the idea is really to recontextualize this problem, which I'm now going to tell you about. Okay, so you'll probably be aware that there is a whole bunch of work, or particularly in the media, but also academic work, which claims that our minds are being diminished by the internet. So one very, very well-referenced book, or a widely read book, is by Nicholas Carr, called The Shallows. There's other books by established and important researchers like Cherry Turkle, Alone Together. The idea is that the internet, in some sense, is impacting upon us, impacting upon our brain, and in general, this impact is not something which is good. It's undermining a whole host of cognitive and social capabilities. There was a lot of stuff in the media going back to about 2007. Actually, when Facebook really starts to be widely used, when people were worried about, for instance, Facebook addiction is damaging your children's brain, according to the book of The Shallows, again, according to Carr, the internet is an engine of distraction. It's something that sort of undermines our agentive capacities, sometimes spoken about in terms of capacity, about what the internet's doing to us. And there's quite a nice quote, again, going some time back now, from Edward Tenner, who wrote, "It would be a shame if the brilliant technology of the internet ended threatening the kind of intellect that produced it." So the thought is that this could be quite profound. There's this kind of technological construction which is having a kind of impact on us. And somehow, I mean, I sometimes talk about this, the impact metaphor as being a kind of ballistic metaphor. Everybody always talks about the impact of the internet. It's a bit like a missile coming in, sort of decimating the terrain that it strikes. And, sorry, to flick that forward. So my thought and its relationship with human beings, human cognition, and human agency. And in general, perhaps we could achieve a better characterization and a better understanding of this relationship. Because to sort of preview the argument a little bit, I mean, we've had various regimes of technology more or less since we were human. Perhaps even the creation of technology, Homo faber, is very tied up with being human, or even a kind of definition of what it is to be human. So human being the maker. So at least one wants to ask, what is so special about this technology, which we should be so worried and threatened by it? And at the same time, a kind of, if you like, reflexive question, what is so strange, what human agency such threat? So I will try to answer this question, but first I'm going to do a big kind of detour now into agency and the ideas of Michael Bratman. I hope you're all still getting this, by the way, because it's gone silent, as Marek pointed out. Anyway, here's Bratman. So Michael Bratman tries to characterize what he calls strong agency. According to his work, there are these kind of interlocking features of agency. We form plans that organize our activity over time. We see ourselves as agents that persist. We can reflect on our plans and policies, and we can regulate and achieve self-control through those plans. The idea is that these attributes interact, that is, we conform to and manage plans, and through them we can guide our actions. We recognize and regulate ourselves through these plans, and they're temporally extended. That is, we kind of, if we're involved in a project, one of Bratman's favorite examples is writing a book. You you think about the book, you tell people about the book, you're going to publish it, or you might not, but you make plans, you make kind of a whole series of decisions about how you're going to organize your time, and you're able to kind of view these developing or not in a temporally extended way. And also through this kind of planfulness, we're able to reflect on our motivations and reasons, trying to keep them consistent, meaningful, and we regulate our activity with the plans. All of these things add up, and they're supposed to tell us something about what it is to be human, something about the special nature, according to Bratman, of human agency. And this is supposed to be, again, in addition to purposefulness, something that Bratman calls mere animal purposefulness. Now, I realize this sort of may sit a bit ill with some kind of inactive views of agency, but I think one of the reasons I took this to be an interesting starting point is because it's kind of a high-level view of what agency is supposed to be, quite a cognitivist view of what agency is supposed to be, clearly from the centrality of plans, and it's one that we can use as a kind of a measure for other views. Finally, to say about Bratman's views that according to his account of agency, his account of agency is developed in order to do justice to complex cognitive economies of human beings. Now these, although I don't think he's particularly explicit about this, I think implicitly these are conceived of as complex internal cognitive economies of human beings. He writes, human agents have complex psychological economies, and we frequently can explain what they do by appeal to the functioning of these psychological economies. So mental states, beliefs, desires, all working as a kind of internal complex. And this account of agency is supposed to explain something about kind of hierarchicality, if I can say that, the hierarchical nature of human agency, motivations. Things like the weakness of the will can in part be explained. We can take attitudes towards our desires and beliefs and projects, and all of this stuff is supposed to hang together. So there we go. Yeah, that's just a sort of reference point then. Now I want to take us on to, if you like, another take on agency. And just to preface a little bit, I'm going to claim that, in fact, these two views, although they superficially seem very different, they have a lot in common and may not even be incompatible at all. This is Lambros Malafouris' idea of material agency. So Malafouris has pointed out that cognitive capacities developed with technology do not just bring out form which is already in the brain. That is, our cognitive abilities are not just there, sort of latent in the brain to, to be brought out sometime. That, in fact, our interaction with tools, technology, material culture can in many ways trailblaze new forms of cognition. He argues this in, one of many examples around Near East technologies Near East technologies of clay tokens, which he argues that were originally used for accounting purposes, but gradually become the foundation for a new kind of mathematics. So sophisticated mathematical abilities, historically speaking, only emerge in interaction with material culture. So this immediately raises the question of how far back this goes. How many other capacities, cognitive capacities, agentive, even our agentive nature might similarly lie not sort of hidden away in the brain or even in direct social interaction, but emerges from our creation of material culture. So there's going to be a few little bits of reading now based around what Malafouris talks about as a central example. That's potting, the potter at his or her wheel. So Malafouris claims that human agency is material agency. It emerges and exists between human beings and our artifactual culture. It does not exist inside of us. Malafouris calls this view the thing idealist view, that is the kind of internalist view of agency. He rejects this view and seeks for agency and interaction. And he seeks for agency around the brain artifact or the body artifact interface, I guess. That is, and he claims that the potter at her wheel is a prototypical exemplar and one of the best and diachronic models of the active mind. Not only do I see the ways of pot making as ways of thinking, he says, I also believe that one can find few other diachronic and cross-cultural examples where all the major ingredients of the cognitive of the human are brought forth and actualized in such an explicit and to a large extent empirically accessible manner. And he further argued that the potter at her wheel is to material engagement theory what the Turing machine is to computational theory. That is a kind of microcosm of, you know, how material engagement theory takes cognition and agency to be. And so we have, yeah. So I must admit, I'm just. Marek, I'm not sure how I'm doing for time here. I've got about 10 minutes.
Yeah, you've got about, I'd say it's sort of 8 or 9 minutes left anyway.
Okay, so I'm going to try to sort of speed through these because, yeah, I didn't take the time when I started. Sorry about that. Okay, so Malafouris claims that there's a kind of internalist misconstrual of agency often going on. And one might think, for instance, simply receive and transmit that information to areas inside the potter's brain. They have nothing to do but they have nothing to do with the central executive mechanism responsible for executive processing and decision making. Malafouris claims that this is a misconstrual because what's actually happening is the clay and the potter are in mutually, and the real nature of the clay facts, the potter's wheel and such like, which are shaping the final production of the pot in the same way that the potter is. So there is a kind of dynamic interaction, and the creation of the pot emerges from this dynamic interaction. And the idea is that this is a kind of prototype of human sort of agentive capacities. They typically emerge in these kind of interactive processes at our surfaces as we interact with the material world. I might just skip this a little bit because I'm aware that we're sort of tight on time. So one more quote, I think. When it comes to embodied skill, potters are no exception to the rules of action and material engagement. Potters know more than they can tell or explain, and their hands often have reasons which their minds are not aware of, and which the clay may resist or accommodate. So the clay and the potter's wheel are in this, along with the and the potter are in this kind of interaction, giving rise to the particular activity. Right, so just to summarize then, material agent theory holds that human agency is not, generally at least, internal, but arises in interaction and in material engagement, in skillful action. Human agency is, in fact, material agency. It's not natural and internal, but composed in interaction largely with material culture. We find it and can examine it by looking at the timescales of interaction between humans and their artifacts. That is, we need to, if we want to understand our agentive abilities, we need to look at the fine detail of the engagement, how sometimes the stiffness of the clay, for instance, might cause a certain kind of movement, and how that movement in turn may change the the ongoing activity of the potter. And these things are in a kind of dance, which I know is a word that people often like. All right, so I want to put these two things together. So is strong agency material agency? So I think that Bratman, it's clear, largely leaves out the role of material culture in sustaining and enabling this planfulness, reflectivity, and sometimes persistence of much human cognitive activity, much human agency. But One of Bratman's favorite illustrations for these capacities is a writer engaged in writing a book, which I've already talked about a little bit. Bratman notes the importance of the planning activity involved, how the writer holds herself to the task through submitting, regulating, and occasionally reinterpreting actions in terms of an explicitly made plan. What Bratman overlooks is the constitutive role played by artifacts and material culture. And I have one other, I guess it's a long quote from Andy Clark, which is a source of, and the extended mind view is a source of material engagement theory. And it's a nice example because this, probably many people have seen this. This brain, it's like the brain's eye view reflecting on a day of work of a writer, which John has done this great work. But the brain reflects. My role, as best as I can recall, is to support John's rereading of a bunch of old materials and notes, and to react to those materials by producing a few fragmentary ideas and criticisms. These small responses were restored as further marks on paper and in margins. Later on, I played a role in the reorganization of these marks on clean sheets of paper, adding new online reactions to the fragmentary ideas. The cycle of reading, responding, and external reorganization was repeated again and again. At the end of the day, the good ideas with which John was so quick to credit me emerged as the fruits of these repeated little interactions between me and the various external media. For John's brain, the production of the book is not something which has just emerged out of itself. It's something that emerges from the interactions, on Clark's telling at least. So before returning to cloud tech, the internet and those things, I just wanted to explore a little bit of the continuity between Bratman and Malafouris. As we've seen, there are sort of great differences in terms of approach, and things look very different. One is a sort of bottom-up account, one is an interactive account, one is an internalist account. But there are also strong continuities. I'm not sure if, other than the things that I've already spoken about in terms of the, if you like, the material instantiation, clearly of great importance, that Malafouris actually contradicts Bratman. Rather, if you want, Bratman's view can be account can be looked at a kind of high-level account, a top-down account of the sorts of things that Malafouris is analyzing. That is, Malafouris, although I haven't really given you quotes, continually talks of things about aspects like planning, reflection, persistence, and self-regulation in his account of the potter at the wheel. These are things that emerge in interaction, however. They're not somehow internal to the brain of the potter. They're things that are interactive properties. Okay, so one small difference that we might say here, I just think it's just, hopefully I've got a moment to just reflect on this. So there is one, this is a notion I've got from SAS really, but there is a kind of reflexivity which is made, and not reflectivity, which is made explicit in Bratman. That is that when an agent is kind of working on themselves. So when Bratman's talking about agency around writing a book, he's actually more concerned with the way that the agent is structuring his or herself through this kind of process. And that's, you know, that's what agency in this kind of strong sense is supposed to be. And that's not something which I think, again, is implicit in Malafouris, but perhaps it doesn't come out as much as it should. But apart from this difference, I think there is strong continuities between the view, as I've said before. And I think there is no reason that the material agency view can develop in this reflexive, not reflective manner. So a couple of little examples and then a bit of summing up. So this is something that often appears on my screen as I'm trying to do some work during the day. It's a little app called Stay Focused. It sits in my browser. If I look at one of a number of sites that I don't want to distract myself with for more than 15 minutes a day, it blocks me. This is a policy I've taken up. This is a policy I've kind of using this app to implement for me. And through this app, I'm able to sort of maintain myself on the task or on my project, on my plan that I've set for myself. So the technology here is kind of performing materially part of this role of self-regulation and this kind of reflexive role, if you like, which is so important to Bratman and strong agency theory. Another quick example is a more elaborate example, something I personally haven't used, but I've been observing the use of, is the Fitbit. Once again, this is something which is more of a kind of cloud technology or an internet technology device, which of which we like to see a whole lot more, samples a whole bunch of ideally in the original steps. And with this, it can feed back a bunch of on screen or on your app advice about you should walk a bit more, you should get up in the midst of your study period to improve your health. And once again, you can take policies, and these policies can reflect and strengthen your, in this kind of Bratman sense, your agentive capacities, at least in principle. You can kind of use the tech to regulate yourself. So I'm putting forward these examples mainly because it's at least not clear to me that it's necessary in any way that the internet or its attendant technology needs to be agents of distraction. Maybe this is just a kind of phenomenon which falls out of our early interactions with the technology, and as we are able to grasp this technology more, we can do new things with it. Now, one final slide, and this is something which I'm personally trying to get to grips with. There is arguably a problem here. So insofar as material engagement theory is really concerned with the material, the stuff, the artifacts of material culture and how we grasp them and how we interact with them and how we use them, there does seem to be some kind of discontinuity between technologies. In particular, cloud, what I call cloud tech. I have an article there that you can look up if you like. The mobile internet, instantiated in mobile devices with huge databases behind it, personalized so that they have a particular, as individuals, tracking live data from us all the time, what our web browsing habits, but also how we move around in spaces. Companies like Google with their policies. This technology is in some ways very difficult to grasp in the kind of way that Malafouris analyzes the potter at the wheel. It's a more complex technology, clearly, and some people, like I put this, a colleague of mine in Lisbon, Diana Suero, was pointing me towards Bratton's view of the stack, whereby he claims that the internet is a kind of megastructure, a new megastructure, worldwide megastructure. And I think this is not wrong in many respects. So there is a question if we can kind of grasp this materiality very easily. And the only thing I will just point towards as a final thought on this is that the way to probably, at least in the first instance, to follow Malafouris' dictum, which is to look at the points of the interaction, look at timescales in which human beings take up this technology, use it and turn it to their purposes. And in some sort of current work, that's more or less what I've been doing. And I think that's it, really. So I will, Marek, are you still there?
Yes. So
good.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. Shall I stop sharing these slides?
Yes.
So yeah. Okay. If you want to go back to them afterwards, I'm very happy to do that.
Interestingly, I'm having dynamics of interaction issues. My browser window is crawled to a slow, which means feedback on my actions has become a little less reliable.
Oh dear.
But that leads me directly to my first question. So,
great segue.
One of the things I have to do, because I just want to make sure if any of the viewers have questions, again, they can raise those questions either via I suppose probably via live chat or by emailing me, which is marek.mcgann@gmail.com. And I can raise those questions. But I have a number of questions. I do want to get on to the issue of the sort of different perspectives on agency. And I know that was kind of one you knew was coming, and we're not sure how useful or edifying that conversation is going to be, but I think we're going to have a try.
Okay.
But one of the first things, given the interface issues that I'm having, and given it's just the last thing you were talking about there, one of the things that I find interesting is so obviously one of the crucial difference between the potter's wheel and apps or digital technologies in general is the manner in which the feedback occurs. So you have analog versus digital, you have continuous responsive feedback versus stepped, very limited kinds of feedback possible. Of it's not the kind of things that the app can give you are a menu of items, a menu of discrete items that don't slide or seed from one to the other. They're just these sort of individual separate elements, and the dynamics of those are determined not by your sensitivity to the app or even the app's sensitivity to you, but by these mediating electronic and primarily electronic
absolutely
network.
Sorry.
I guess so the sort of the impact of that is sort of matters in the sense that we are like there is a human level of responsiveness that we expect, and there's a sort of a natural timescale to human interaction, which matters a great deal, I think. And I think my read of it would be that material engagement theory could get us asking questions about that potentially in a clear way, that just a sort of a simpler account of agency might not. I'm going to shut up in a second, but I'm just going to give you one very clear example of how I think human behavior overcomes or pushes past the limitations of particularly the timing of responsiveness on internet technologies, and that's in a text chat. So I would generally use either if you're using Skype or Hangout as your sort of your text chat with someone else. What I find tends to happen in those, because of the long delay between response that doesn't occur in conversation, you end up having two conversations simultaneously interleaved. So you say something, they start typing a reply, you say something in reply to something they've already said, and so you've essentially got parallel conversations, except that they're interleaved conversations really rather than parallel. And that's purely driven by how frustrating it is to wait for someone to start talking. Now I know I'm going to stop talking now because I want you to start, but I suppose that gets at the importance of dynamic and time in making actions natural and responsive through different technologies.
I think all of that's they're all great points, and they're sort of the time series question of time scale analysis, I think, does cut to the quick of where if material engagement theory can kind of be used usefully here. So in some ways, I don't think I've done enough work really on this to really make a strong case that this is but let's just, I think there is, I think that's right. And I think, it's very clear, as you say, that certain types of technologically mediated interactions can certainly interrupt, kind of, if you like, natural flow of conversation. Indeed, I mean, again, this is great. The medium is doing, because just as you were telling me this, I mean, there was these kind of outages. So I hope I've got what you said, but there are a few bits I might not have got. But I think it's important that, just one point I kind of didn't make, I made in some previous presentations of similar material, is that I think some of this work, which I skated over at the very beginning, saying like human agency is under threat because of technology. What's so striking about that stuff is that a lot of it was written in 2007, although people are still continually citing it and using the same examples. Is that the model is of somebody seated at a probably desktop computer typing away, and probably a bit like your texting example, which I know is slightly different. And what we already know about this technology is that it's not only multiform. Not only do we now have the internet embedded kind of everywhere in our clothing, in our mobile devices, in Alexa, it's all of that. We have to be quite careful that we don't adopt just one, and possibly increasingly outdated model of what kind of interactions the internet affords. I mean, like, my little quite old Android device here, the main interactive is touchy, it's feely, it's handy, right? It's it's the pinch and the tap. I mean, it's true, as you point out, that the apps on these kind of devices at least tend to be discrete. You tend to interact with one device at a time, and they tend to have a kind of a predetermined interaction metaphor drawn from, if they work, one of several metaphors that we already kind of implicitly understand quite well. But I think, well, this is what I'm trying to maintain. I'm not sure that I have fully and convincingly made this case, but I am trying to maintain that our handiness of our interactions is already approximate in some ways to the sort of skillful practice that you might find around the potter's wheel. So in fact there are direct comparisons, and indeed one of the points that Malafouris always kind of points to, and I sort of skirted over, is that the clay can be resistant, right? The clay doesn't necessarily do what you want it to do. The clay is in his terms, that I'm not sure I completely sign up to, but in his terms, it's an agent. It's also resisting and pushing you in a certain kind of way. And those things that you were just talking about, in many ways, I mean, there would be similar kind of examples. And just the very last point on these kind of things, I mean, I think the bit which I'm still sort of trying to personally kind of broaden, mainly if you want to call them interactions that we're doing in the future with embodied gadgets that we're increasingly a kind of, in a non-normal kind of sense, going into the background, that we don't even notice anymore, that they're increasingly sampling our behavior, taking lots of data from us, building up profiles of us that we may not even realize is happening, or if we do know about, we just forget about. And that kind of personalization is something which is quite different, and it also might push some of the interactions almost to an unconscious or totally invisible kind of level, which you could argue pushes them out of the realm of skillful practice. So I mean, that's something that I think it's right to think about and be concerned about. But I don't think it's true, and it may be becoming less and less true that our interactions are necessarily interrupted by this technology. It may be that as we accommodate and we develop skillful practice, that we can, or they may be interrupted, and we take advantage of those kind of affordances.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that the skills point that you make there is kind of crucial, because the whole point to a skill is coordinating the dynamics of your behavior appropriately to the dynamics of the situation, the task in question. And to that extent, it's there might be resistance, or the environment's never fluid. It's never just, if it's just water, there's not an awful lot you can do with it, right? You can so it has to have its own structure, its own resistance to it, and those characteristics exist for Facebook and Twitter and every other demand that we have. So it's just a matter of becoming skilled Facebook users and skilled Twitter users and so on, or Skype as such.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, go.
No, I was just going to say, in some ways, I mean, when it can seem a bit facile, that kind of point, right? That I'm making, not that you're making. That we can become skilled users of Facebook. I mean, I do think, although this would take quite some examination, I do think materials and sometimes the rather immaterial stuff behind the internet existent in ways that might make it very difficult for us to become skilled users of that technology, and we should take that seriously. You can hide things behind an interface that mean that that are make it significantly difficult to interact in a skillful kind of way, you know, where the parallels break down. And I do think, you know, the sort of, if you like, the social political dimension of this stuff, I mean, that becomes important. But I think a good analysis of how cognitive abilities and agency can arise in interaction gives us a really interesting window, you know, to apply some, you know, to think about those kind of issues. So that's one of the reasons that I've become very interested in.
Yeah, no, good point. Crucial one. Okay, so in that case, can I drag us back to the issue of agency?
Sure.
I think there's an interesting point here. Just I am checking the other potential sources of queries as well. Although I must apologize for the delight that is the internet. It never does the same thing twice. So what works most of the time is I don't know. Today, whether it's my compositor or whether the issues are at my end or someone else's, the things are a little bit more stuttery than they normally are. So my apologies if I'm missing any questions. I suppose is what I'm saying there. So it's not just me deliberately trying to dominate the conversation. I guess what I wanted to raise was this question about whether there's that much of a difference between Bratman and Malafouris, and obviously I think a lot of activists would happily endorse the kind of Malafourisian view, at least of some flavor. There's going to be lots of argument over the details. And I find
less so Bratman
introduced Bratman.
On
the one hand, right, he has all of these trigger words for computational, Cartesianism, primarily with plans. But aside from in fact the specific fixation on plans, which I know plays a significant role in some of Bratman's other notions of agency as a sort of a means of overcoming momentary problems. Momentary issues can be overcome by having more temporally extended forms of agency, and the temporally extended forms of agency, of course, look like plans rather than momentary intentions. And that hierarchical organization of it kind of gets Bratman out of particular issues. But it struck me as if you just removed the word plan. So if we look at the sort of 4 characteristics that I've written down here, I'm not sure if I put them all, of Bratman's concept of strong agency. There's the formation of plans. It's the agent sort of persists in those plans. So there's temporal extension. There's reflection and regulation and activity, sort of active self-control. If we just remove the word plans there and say values instead, you've got something that looks almost sort of exactly like agency in an active sense. And all that's changed is that instead of some explicitly represented plan, that, as Malafouris might say, is kind of the ghost in the brain that gets pushed out into the world through action. You just have a value of the agent which gets regulated on an ongoing basis, and then different kinds of skill will involve values at different timescales, right? So it's kind of one of those characteristics of an active agency that we activists talk about it or sort of ground it in, for example, cellular maintenance or the value of biological self-maintenance. But that those values become transformed, not just built on top of, when they're embedded in wider webs of skilled activity. So I guess my comment is that I agree with your suggestion that Bratman is quite continuous, in fact, with Malafouris. And my sort of question then, I suppose, is do you see anything that's really at issue here? Is there other than someone stamping their foot and saying, no, I want represented plans, is there something that has to be included in Bratman's view that has to be left out of Malafouris' view?
Yeah, well, that's another great question, and yeah, I'll see if I can do it some justice. So, I think it's probably true. I've played up the continuances between the views, but I mean, you could, if you wanted to take a different line on it. I'm going to come back to the value point, by the way. I might need to mold that a bit, but if you take up at one level, you could, if you wanted to be more hostile to Bratman, I think like, well, it's just an idealization, and like all idealizations, it kind of traduces the material that you're trying to understand. So, it arguably is because of the sorts of idealizations, not of Bratman, but of that kind of view which he's articulated without its material and possibly other kinds of social undergirding, that you can achieve that you can come to the point where you see technology as this kind of impact which is alien and foreign to us and artifacts that just disturb human agency, right? Yeah. So actually you're really right to push me on that, because that I should have sort of played up the discontinuity as well. That's a point. So although I think there is something very right about an abstract, if you take a kind of extended interactive, even an active view, that you can interpret Bratman in a way which I think which I think really captures something. I think if you don't bring in that extra dimension, you can make serious mistakes, and they can, I'm always quite interested in practical consequences of these kind of conceptual errors, if you like. There's a kind of, I mean, if I wanted to do a kind of a more, this kind of take this more critical stance, you could say there's a kind of category mistake going on here. You could, for instance, a naive version of Bratman, which of course I'm not saying Bratman is by any means, could look at the Malafouris, all the interactions and say, okay, so I've seen all these interactions, well, where's the agency? Yeah. Because it's, but in a way you say, well, that is the agency. That's when, and that's the main difference. So I think you're right. Those things also need to be pulled out. So there probably are substantial differences when you come to apply the view. That's where it becomes problematic. Now, your question about values is a very interesting one, which I hadn't thought about before at all. So I'm going to flail around a little bit trying to answer it. But I think, I really think, but I will try anyway. I think it's so one problem. Let me just put up a problem, which I'm not sure is any kind of serious problem. But if we just do that straight. I think the first thing to say, I think, you can interpret out of plans. Maybe plans and the centrality of plans in some sense is a kind of hangover from cognitivism, and there may be other ways of thinking it. And indeed, my suggestion is something like we replace plans with material artifacts, with their instantiation, part instantiation in material artifacts. Mm-hmm. Now, could we do the same with values? So, in a way, my worry about that move, and I'm sure I might be a bit wrong-headed on this, but it could be taken as another kind of idealization in a way, because then you want to know where are the values, where. So I realize that an activism gives us a way into that question, through the kind of the interaction, values are. But well, maybe rather than me trying to do this, maybe I'll just put that back to you. Isn't there a danger of, by putting values in rather than something more material, the way that I was trying to come at, that we actually go back towards a more idealistic view?
Okay, so interesting question. So I guess it would depend on sort of precisely what you mean by idealistic. Are we sort of talking sort of schematic, or are we talking?
Okay, so maybe I'll try to be more specific. I mean, my worry is that so where are the values as such in this interaction? So with the plan. So in a sense, my sort of reading of Bratman through Malafouris is that you can almost replace plans with the constraints of material artifacts and the social institutions we build around them. So it takes something which can seem, because otherwise you might think the plans are just in the head, right? They're just these things which pre-exist. That's where the plans are. And so the argument is that, well, yeah, there are elements of them in our heads, yes, but that's not really, that doesn't help us really understand these things. If we want to get a kind of more detailed, material, non-idealizing explanation, we need to put that out. So I think if you want to put values in instead, you'd have to do the same kind of job, right? You'd have to say, so I now want, so I mean, it's not. I don't think you have an answer. I can kind of guess the way the answer might go, but how? But maybe you could tell me how you think they might go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have presaged the answer in the sense of the sort of values and the dynamic. I mean, the characteristic of values, as sort of activists frequently describe them, is that the values are. I mean, essentially, they're relational terms, right? So the notion of what is good or what is bad is almost in any case always relational. It's good for someone, bad for someone, and it's also it's important that it be understood. We avoid any kind of temporal atomism. Like we could sort of press pause on the dynamics of an entire system and say, right, well, during this moment, this is the value. That's an incorrect intuition if anyone's got that. That it's more in the case of the values are enacted over the sort of prolonged course of a system developing over time, and they are in essence they're like a sort of attractor basins or they're tendencies in the system. To essentially for self-maintenance, except that the system can be described at sort of a number of different, or identified at a number of different, what we often term levels of abstraction. So it's not always biological value, I suppose, is the key thing. You can have social values, you can have personal values, and so on.
Yeah, that's I think that that's great. Yeah, I think that. So then my answer changes a little bit. So I thought, it might be that it might be another way of going is to say that this sort of strange Bratman Malafouris hybrid that I've created, this kind of strong material agency, is still lacking something, right? And it's still lacking an account of value, which you could argue is driving a whole bunch of interactions, and that would be perhaps where the more, if you like, classic sort of autopoietic style of activism might come in and do a good job. So in that sense, at least the way that you've explained it there, which I think sits well with me, it's not so much that the plans you can swap out plan for values, but you need to add another element. It needs to be made a bit ontologically richer, if you like, the description of agency, and in a way that doesn't surprise me that that's the case, because I mean in the way that I said in the introduction, that Bratman kind of skirts over this mere purposiveness. I mean, clearly he's aware that's in the background. Malafouris is very is advancing a kind of an activism, he thinks. He's even more aware of those kind of things, although I don't think he speaks about them that much. I could be wrong about that. It may be that that's just the other that's just the other bit of ground that we need to kind of really make this a good sort of interactive material theory, that we need to complete the theory. So I'm glad we had this conversation about this. I can't probably say very much more about that element, but I think it's very, very relevant future thinking.
I mean, it's something that did strike me particularly when you picked up on in that Bratman versus Malafouris element, when you talked about reflexivity versus reflectivity, and that for Bratman, agency is in essence self-control. And that's strong agency is what psychologists would call self-regulation, or mental control in some sense, and that struck me as a kind of almost an unnecessary step, but it does depend on a sharp distinction being made between the self and the environment. That control of when
Yeah.
control of the interaction is what we're aiming for, and some of that emerges in the interaction.
Yeah.
Then you're automatically, if you're saying, well, look, the self ends at the skin, then anything that happens outside of the skin is not self-control anymore. It's not agency. It's, I don't know, it's something else it's doing. And that, it just seemed an unnecessary step for me, despite the fact that what Bratman, everything else that Bratman talks about, you could capture in at least in a material engagement framework and an active framework in the right kind of way, I think, if you just didn't have that it didn't have that commitment.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, actually. That's really, yeah. I think that okay, if I was to try and defend my, it may be that I should just concede that is a very good point. That, but if I was to try and sort of defend what I was saying about it, I mean, there's a kind of thought that if you're writing a book, or you make it, or you're potting, shaping a pot, the thing that you're doing is the activity is directed at final result of a book or a pot, and that's kind of shaping. You know, that's the, and if, you know, it's very clear, it's much clearer with a book, which has more timescales in a sense, because as you and I know, trying to write books or write papers or theses, those kind of things, they take years of your life, and you're having to, you know, regulate a whole bunch of activities, you know, many different timescales, the whole, you know, the whole time. That sort of thing is continuous. I think what Bratman's kind of got in mind, although he does use the book, the examples of the book, what Bratman has a kind of is, you know, what we, in a sense, what we are as agents, you know, the way that, I don't know, Merritt McGann is actualized through organizing the Enzo seminars or something like that, you know. So I think there is a difference in emphasis, but maybe you're right that I should just push a bit harder, you know, and so, you know, so I pointed it out as a discontinuity, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it's just, you know, maybe it's a rather superficial feature, because indeed, you know, making pots and becoming a master potter, you know, well, making pots, you know, makes you into a master potter after some point. You know, the two are, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it struck me as something quite, in essence, that the apparent difference between Malafouris and Bratman on that is actually driven by the differences in the materiality of the actions involved. In which case, it's, you know, Bratman is Malafouris writ large, and there's not as much of a discontinuity as but it becomes a question as to whether or not these apparent theoretical commitments by Bratman are something he really wants to stick to, or something he'd be happy to say, well, no, this is just a special case of that. And vice versa with Malafouris, I suppose.
Well, I have a sense that, you know, I mean, I may be wrong. I wouldn't claim to be, you know, to have read every one of Bratman's papers, but from, you know, from the main text that I've, it's just something he doesn't consider, right? I mean, he is writing this stuff around the same time as, you know, people are coming up with the ideas of the extended mind and those kind of ideas. But there's not, you know, until quite recently, I don't think there was much interplay by the you know, that very kind of analytic framework and the more cog-sci inflected framework that, you know, the people like Andy Clark are developing. So I think it's simply not. So I really don't know. I'm sure he's come across these ideas now, but I really don't know what he'd say about that, because I think, I mean, it would probably depend on how it's pushed, right? If it's pushed as like, this is a great interpretation of your ideas, like my original take. If it's put as, this shows how you falsely idealize the nature of agency, I mean, there's some difference there to how to, you know, sort of press the dialectic.
Yeah. Well, listen, Rob, I think we're sort of running close to the end of our sort of the time for the lockdown here, I think. So I guess it just leaves me to thanks very much for presenting the seminar and for putting up with the questions as well afterwards. And I sort of invite you to sort of keep an eye on the the website as well over the next little while, so that forum might kick off.
Absolutely, yes, that'd be great.
So, so yeah, thanks a million for giving us the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Mark, and it's been great fun.
Yeah, so we will be back in, I think, November's ENSO seminar, which will be, I should be able to give the date, although I'll do the usual. The second of November is our first Thursday of the month. So Tom Froese will be in a sort of a colleague of myself and Rob's as well. We'll be in to talk about something inactively, stroke ecologically, stroke dynamically, I'm sure. And I'm looking forward to that as well. So Rob, thanks again, and we will see everyone in a month for the next ENSO seminar.
Thanks a lot.